Today I'm bringing you the perfect evidence-based leg day. I don't really know if it's perfect, I just wanted you to click on this. And today with this perfect evidence-based leg day, I'm gonna answer these questions. These are some really common things when people are going through a leg day. Did I get everything? There's this idea, did I miss anything? Is the range of motion there? Do I need to bias anything? Since everybody says bias now, is my exercise selection efficient? Is it the most evidence-based stuff, or am I wasting it with fluff exercises? I hear people say stuff about fluff. I don't want fluff. Did you avoid junk volume and redundancy? So sometimes people are like, oh, which exercises do I do? Or if I already did this one, am I covered for that one? We're gonna go through that. I'm gonna give you an example of the perfect quad and ham workout. So again, today's a little bit more from the example of a quad and ham workout. Obviously calves are part of your legs. Obviously people consider glutes part of the legs, hips, whatever. Specifically for this day, I'm talking mainly about quads and hams. And I'm gonna even go through at the end a little bit of exercise selection, give you some swaps, and also go over some things that people ask about volume, reps and reserve, things like that. But the reality is, so I'm going to give you something on paper. You're going to see again when I give you swaps, it doesn't have to be these exact exercises. I'll give you some things where, again, if you don't have a hack squat or whatever it is, we'll go through that. But just give you the concepts and principles going through that. And so what am I going to base this on? So everybody says evidence-based. I'm here to remind you first and foremost, evidence-based is multiple things. So it is the nerd stuff. We want to look at peer-reviewed research. We want to go and have people that get degrees and do a lot of continuing education, all that stuff. But you also want people that actually train human beings and produce results for a living. Look at me, both of those things. Yeah, I'm saying it. But anyway, so that's both forms of evidence. Things that obviously we can put through some controls to kind of filter out what works, and that's what the peer-reviewed stuff is great for. But at the end of the day, some of that just falls flat on its face. People have these things, but if you don't actually train people, you can't create any context or nuance where, okay, well, even though this may say that, here's what I found with this population or that population, or why something might not work as well as it does. And you'll even see that. People will say from peer-reviewed evidence, this is what we know from 10 years ago, and then 10 years down the road, things change. So we're gonna look at all that kind of stuff and hopefully get a good view of what works from science evidence and also from actually training human beings. So step number one, this is always important for leg day. Take off your shirt, put on your, give me a pen. Put on your short shorts, yell at your training partner. Ah, that just looks like I'm vomiting on him. That's a joke. That's a photo shoot. We weren't actually working out. This is, anybody doesn't know when you see a photo shoot like this, it's like the day after a show, the last thing you feel like doing is lifting heavy weights. So you just pretend that you lift heavy weights. And we did this because if you ever read bodybuilding magazines in the 90s, this is what every photo shoot looked like. I don't really know why. I never actually trained legs like this. I never actually threw up on someone while I was training them. But anyway, I digress. Let's move on. So we're gonna go through first, did I get everything? So what does that even entail? If I was gonna say, well, did I get everything? Did you train things to their full contractile range of motion? So we're gonna go through a little bit of basic anatomy here, not too complicated. And then did I bias different fibers? So again, the conversation of bias, I think, really comes into place. You kind of have to have a ball and socket joint involved, and you kind of have to have a muscle where there's a significant different direction of some of the fibers that we consider one muscle. So the example would be a pec, where you have some clavicular fibers that go at this angle, and then you're gonna have some kind of lower pec fibers, that kind of go down at this angle, the ones that actually attach more towards the ribs, the base of the sternum. So when you have things that can pull this direction and things that can pull this direction, that may warrant some biasing. As far as quads and hams are concerned, that's not really a concern because, again, even though we have the hip joint involved a little bit, for all intents and purposes, we're looking at the knee. So again, it's not worth trying to bias. To answer the question, I think it's completely useless to do a lot of programming with different foot position or slight internal external rotation difference to hips. Doesn't create significant difference or stimulus for the hamstrings particularly. So what I want to show, and then I'm going to go over with Jerry real quick, who if you haven't met him, you'll meet him in a minute, is for all intents and purposes, the quads, we're just talking about the knee joint. Yes, I'm aware that the rec fem crosses over the hip, but if we're talking about the meat of what are most of the quad muscles, it's really just existing at the knee joint. And we'll discuss a little bit why this is a great example of you don't technically have to, if I want to train something more lengthened-ish or more shortened-ish, it doesn't mean you actually have to take that to the last little teeny tiny bit as far as we feel like those muscles can physiologically shorten or stretch. Lots of times because of joint structure, because of other muscles involved, that's actually a risk for injury. Now hamstrings, for all intents and purposes, the meat of your hamstrings cross over your hip. So what the hip is doing with hamstring training is much more of a concern. So we can't just look at is the knee fully flexed or extended, we have to look at what the hip's doing as well too. So I'm gonna bring over Jerry. You guys haven't met Jerry before. I slap these muscles on here real quick to help. So if there's any super nerds watching, don't zoom in and see if the surfaces are perfectly correct. But so I tried to put on here the yellow's kind of the majority of your quad muscles. I'm aware they kind of, it's not perfect, all right? But I just want to show on here the red would be the rec fem, crosses over the hip. So again, for the majority of the quads, this is the full contractile range. Just look at the knee. It's fully extended knee, means fully shortened quads, and fully flexed knee. Someone's going to break when I do this. It's probably right about there, but it's really going to be limited as well too when people talk about fully lengthening the quads. The funny thing is the bigger your calves and hamstrings get, the less likely you are to be able to fully lengthen them. So someone extremely skinny, I'm going to break something, can fold it up probably like that, where someone very large probably can only go there. And for them, they're going to be limited by tissue, maybe not even exactly what the muscles can do. But for all intents and purposes, fully lengthened, fully shortened. Oh, and that's what I did. I just broke them. Jerry, I'm so sorry. Let's see if I can reattach it. I'm performing surgery. Voila! Faster than any orthopedic surgeon. Now, as far as the rec fem is concerned, it's going to be, basically think about it, shortened across the knee, but to be fully shortened, you would also have to be hip flexed. So you can see as I go like this, hopefully that makes sense. You can see it's longer here and shorter here. So if I really wanted to fully lengthen the rep fem, you're going to have some combination of full knee flexion and hip extension. So again, there's going to be some subtle difference here because not everyone has the same length ability with the rec fem. So for someone, it could technically be here, someone it could be here, someone it could be here. So it's not necessarily this idea of full hip extension and full knee flexion. It's going to be a combination of both. For the hamstring, let's flip it around. And again, I kind of just did this real quick as well too. I kind of wanted to split to show that obviously I know there's different attachments for the bicep femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, blah, 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 nerd. But the big thing here is obviously it crosses over the hip joint and crosses over the knee joint. So what does that mean? We can't just look at the knee and say, hey, this is a fully shortened hamstring or this is a fully lengthened hamstring. The hamstring would have to be some degree of hip extension. So again, realize this is hip extension, that shortens the hamstring, and full knee flexion to be a fully shortened hamstring, right? So same thing, it's not going to be the exact same for everybody. So again, we have to have full knee flexion and some degree of hip extension, or full hip extension and some degree of full knee flexion. Hopefully that makes sense for the hamstring to be fully shortened. Somewhere back here. But again, for someone it could be here, could be here. It could have to do with these muscles themselves. It could actually have to do with the rec fem. But that's a longer conversation. And then to stretch it, I'm not going to flip them around, but so again, it's not just about full knee extension. So yes, that does lengthen, going from here to here lengthens the hams, but you also need some degree of hip flexion. So somewhere over here is going to be a fully lengthened hamstring. It's kind of in my way. We'll flip it all the way around again. Why not? While we're here. So again, just so that's clear, fully lengthened hamstring, full knee extension, and some degree of hip flexion. So again, that's going to be different for every single person. This could be it for someone. This could be it for somebody else. So again, where exactly it is going to be different, but again, there's going to be some degree of knee extension and hip flexion. So that's just the brief, just a little bit of anatomy. So you know, if those are the positions we have to reproduce for fully lengthened, get out of there, Jerry. Fully lengthened and fully shortened. I wanted to give you some pictures so we all feel smart looking at this anatomy stuff. Ooh, look, it's labeled. Neat. I know about muscles. Give me my pen. Look, oh, labeled, circle, I'm a professor, I'm in school. Oh, look at this up here. Oh, muscles, bone surfaces. Oh, very smart. But then I actually wanted to show you on something kind of moving-ish with bones, and then we're going to put it all together with looking at actual human beings. Isn't that a weird idea? So hopefully we all got that. And then, is my exercise selection efficient and the most evidence-based? Let's look at the evidence. Bam. Yeah, that's that. Boom. End of discussion. But anyway, if we actually want to look at some stuff, we're going to prioritize, we're going through bullet point by bullet point. My quad made me lose my concentration. I don't even know where I'm at now. But we want to prioritize, in my professional opinion, this is something that's not going to be a definitive thing, but I'm going to give you all sorts of evidence to kind of say that I would think this is a pretty good thing to prioritize a muscle's mid and lengthened contractile range. So starting 10 plus years ago, when I was actually really learning a little bit about like the length-tension relationship, and knowing that it seems like intramuscular force is kind of king when it comes to hypertrophy or the stimulus for hypertrophy. Again, understanding, length tension, muscles produce the most intramuscular force probably in their mid-range first, and then lengthened range next, and they're pretty definitively the weakest in the most shortened position. People will get confused then and look at internal moment arms of anatomy and say, well, look, there's exceptions for glutes and things like that. No, that's the exception of external appearance of strength. The same thing holds true for actual intramuscular force, internally what's going on. So that'll make someone's head hurt. But I feel like from a pure meathead standpoint, if we look at what the best mass builders are of all time, they tend to be exercises that overload the mid and lengthened range. So we have a huge amount of evidence from actual looking at the meatheads, which is a great thing to do. And then we seem to be kind of having science catching up. This is a big deal right now. Everyone talks about length and range, length and partials. I don't think there's anything that definitively says the lengthened range itself is the most important. One, I don't think the lengthened range has been well defined in any research, so we really can't compare it to something if we don't really define it well. There's nothing, I think, that excludes the mid-range from the lengthened range. And for all intents and purposes, I always say, like, yeah, you don't have to train the shortened range. I would 100% agree. You don't really have to train any muscle length, and you can still produce results. Just keep in context, everyone out there that argues about this stuff, this is a good concept where, again, we're going to bias some stuff I think makes good sense, but there's nothing out there that says you can't grow muscle training the shortened range. Not at all. There's nothing that says you can't grow muscle training just the mid-range. Not at all. In fact, there's tons of evidence that shows you can. It's really just an argument of efficiency. So for me, based on all that evidence, in my programming, I'm going to prioritize the mid and lengthened range. But if you're kind of a meathead that trains kind of like a bodybuilder for hypertrophy, you've been doing this for a little while, most of the time, why not train the shortened range as well too? I mean, it's generally just one more exercise. Now again, if you're got a newbie, I think it makes a whole lot of sense if I'm training Mrs. Jones or whatever, and we just want one thing for quads, I'm gonna pick something, maybe if I only can program one exercise, maybe she's doing full body, who knows what, I would pick something that's mid-length and range and not fully shortened for that reason. You know, because again, if I'm gonna pick one of the two, yes, I'm going to prioritize mid and lengthen. So there's a good case for if I only have one exercise to choose for, maybe for someone like that, I would go with that direction. And then we're going to go through some of the components. Hopefully you've watched some of my stuff. We're picking good exercises. We want things that align well, meaning hit the tissue, which is pretty easy in this case. But you want to make sure that it's joint healthy. Bracing, complexity, you don't want lack of bracing or overly complex exercises taking away from your ability to, keep progressing load as high as humanly possible. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the profiles and the range of motion. Obviously, like we talked about, making sure we're training those range of motions I just talked about, but most importantly too, loading them. Because again, that's where that profile thing comes in. I could say, hey, look, a dumbbell lateral raise trains the mid and lengthen range because I start down here, but does it load the lengthen range? No, not at all. So that's an example of, yeah, we want to make sure that we train it, but also that we actually load those positions. And then this idea of junk volume redundancy, just meaning you want to have the concept of not doing things that are super similar over and over and over. Like I'll literally have someone that starts their workout with a barbell bench press, flat barbell bench press, then flat dumbbell bench press, then a flat machine press, and then a flat cable fly. And the reality is all of those are really, really close as if you actually look where the pec exists, crossing over the shoulder joint, and just look at the upper arm and its relation to, the joint it crosses over, the GH joint, it's pretty much the same motion 4 times in a row. So it's not to say that you couldn't do 2 presses or you couldn't even do 2 flies, but just have this basic idea of what range of motion am I training, what's the loading pattern, and if you do something, be done with it. That being said, it's the other side of that. There's not wrong to accumulate a little bit more volume with something that's has maybe something slightly different. So you're going to see in the example of the workout I give, I have a hack squat and a quad dominant leg press. So both of those are really kind of training the same motion, but one of them is very different as far as, one, we're kind of taking the ankle out of it a little bit, and then 2, we're taking pretty much everything above the pelvis out of it. So even though it's a similar range of motion, there are some differences between the two. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying barbell press and dumbbell press or barbell press and a machine press, like that's bad, whatever. But when you get to the point where it's 3, 4, 5 exercises that are just the same thing, there's a point where it's probably not that efficient. And the real thing to get out of there is this idea that you don't have to do more. So someone felt like, someone might say, hey, for me, flat dumbbell press feels like the absolute best exercise. But I know you have to do barbell bench press because that's the king of chest exercises. Like that's complete nonsense. If you train, a press that's flat from here to here, you're biasing the same fibers with both. And especially in that case, someone saying those things might mean the dumbbell press feels it more in their pecs, less in their shoulders. But if they felt out of obligation to do something inferior where I feel less pec and more shoulder pain, that's the thing you really want to avoid. So that's the concept with junk volume and redundancy. Having, if you're training the same stuff, basically not doing the exact same stuff over and over. So we're going to look at here. This was the sequence of the quad and hamstring workout that I put Mel and Tiffany through. So seated leg curl. So we're going to start with hamstrings. I always say you don't have to do this. You could start with quads for sure. I like starting with hamstrings. One, because if you're in a seated leg curl, and especially when we do heavy sets, where does my pen go? Right when I need it. We use a seatbelt. So I should say when we have heavy sets going on, we're stabilizing the pelvis, we're stabilizing the femur. And when you do that, basically there's no challenge to all the muscles that have to stabilize the spine, stabilize the pelvis. So I say that where there's no real pre-fatigue coming into squats here, and you really don't use your hamstrings very much in a squat. You use them almost not at all, basically just for an isometric in a very quad dominant squat. So then honestly, some of this is just aesthetics. So I'm training them, they both compete. They both want to look as good as they possibly can for their given categories. Most categories, you're never going to see anyone whose hamstrings are big enough. Even at the pro level, almost anyone's hamstrings can be better. So I'd like to start with this. And what did I say? We're going to try and prioritize the muscles mid and length and range. So what did I say about the hamstring? What do we need? We need full, did we get it about? Yeah. We need full knee extension, which we have. So here's the knee joint, pretty much fully extended. And we need some degree of hip flexion. So this right now I would consider training, and then we're going to go through that range of motion at the end there, somewhere like that. And so obviously we go through this much range of motion at the knee joint. So when we're in that fully extended knee position, that is at least a near fully lengthened hamstring. Now this is where I say that you don't have to get every last single inch. Now if she tilted her pelvis, let me see if I can get some of this out of here. So could we close this angle a little bit more? So right now the top of her pelvis is probably, this is probably where her pelvis is sitting. And so that's really where we're getting that angle. Now let's say I had her lean forward, fix, no, fix, no. There we go. So if I actually had her lean forward a little bit more, and again, not lean forward from the spine, but lean forward from her pelvis, could I close that angle a little bit? So could I bring it from where it is probably there to there and maybe get a little bit more closed angle and get a little bit more length out of the hamstring? Maybe, but when I listen to the athlete, and then two, I realize in this position, you also could potentially hurt yourself, especially with how much load that we're using. So that's why I say lengthen to mid-ish range, because again, you don't need to take everything to the extreme. But that being said, if someone can comfortably tip forward a little bit more, and then obviously her torso would just come along for the ride up here, you could either do that from the seat or just leaning forward. The issue on this is if you lean forward, you take away output. So again, that's where like in real life, these are things as a coach or a trainer you have to consider. But the main take home here, hopefully, as you can very clearly see, because we are hip flexed to some degree, because she was fully knee extended, that is the fully lengthened hamstring or close to it, training right through the mid-range. So it doesn't matter if I even could close this up to the point where I could bring her leg here, it still wouldn't be a fully shortened hamstring because she's flexed at the hip. Hopefully that makes sense. Then from there we went to a fully lengthened quad. So fully lengthened quad, relatively speaking, right there. So again, remember what we had with Mr. Jerry? We have as much of a closed, much of a flexed knee as we can possibly get, right? So again, this isn't counting the rect fem. The rect fem obviously is not fully lengthened because you are hip flexed, but every other quad right now, because of how much tissue contact we have here, I really can't smash her in there anymore. That is going to be pretty mumuch a fully, for all intents and purposes, a fully lengthened quad. And then when we go back to the top, you know, once we get to the top, like there's no load up here, so she stayed just short of full lockout anyway. So again, no squat is for anything in the more shortened position. So for all intents and purposes, she stops right there. And this is as far as we're going to go. So what is that range of motion as far as the knee is concerned? From fully flexed to maybe 20 or 30 degrees short of full extension. That is the lengthened to the mid-range. So this is a great exercise for probably training 80% of the quad's contractile range through that length where they probably produce the most force, and also arguably, according to evidence, create the most stimulus for hypertrophy. Next, we are moving on to hamstrings. What's the purpose of this? Well, now we have the hips in a different position. So hopefully you can see, what do we want to do here? We want to fully shorten the hip. Let's take it through. So what do we need for, fully shorten the hamstring? We need a fully flexed knee. And so this is where you get a couple things going on. One, she could probably bring that tissue a little bit closer together maybe, but we're actually getting to the point where the machine itself is smushing into her hamstring. So for all intents and purposes, that's a fully flexed knee. And then I said you need some degree of hip extension. So she is not fully hip extended. Technically, if I put her torso up here, that would be full hip extension. But this is, in my opinion, the goal is to train the short and to mid-range, just like the general theme. Where again, especially for a fully shortened muscle, maybe getting it absolutely as completely shortened as if I had her up here on a pad. Like, you know, if I had her propping herself up, you'll see people prop up and they go into full hip extension. If you've ever actually trained a human being and you actually have them do this, whatever load they were doing, just cut it in half. And so again, what is the merit of getting that muscle as fully short as you could possibly get? I might have somebody do that sometime as practice or drill or have another purpose, But for growing muscle, if I'm getting that last, whatever that might actually be, let's say that's 10 more degrees range of motion or 20, whatever, is the juice worth the squeeze? Probably not, because force output will be so low. And especially for the entire range of motion, then basically we're just limiting the load that we can use to this position, and the entire rest of the range of motion will be undertrained. So that's why, again, you want those themes, in my opinion, not taking everything to the extreme. You don't have to fully shorten the muscle, but between those two, hopefully you can see from hip flexion to full extension to hip extension to some degree and full knee flexion, we've now trained that hamstring probably through 95% of its contractile range. All right, get off of there. I did it. What do we have next? We have a leg extension. What do we have going on here? Should be pretty apparent. There's the knee joint, pretty much fully extended knee. So it's a fully shortened quad. And if we really wanted a fully shortened rec fem, I would probably just have her sit upright. But what happens when you sit upright in a leg extension? Sometimes you can decrease output, not too bad. Sometimes if you sit really upright in a leg extension and you feel your hamstrings more, that could be something where maybe they're at a length that they're not super happy about while you're going through this as well too. So this is one of these things going on a little bit. Whenever we have a knee joint that we're training, it's not just about what's on one side and pulling, it's about what's on the other as well too. So sometimes the symptom of something feeling tight can be your body saying, hey, maybe this isn't a position we're super comfortable in or we have a lot of output in. So this is the same thing. One, I can definitely fully shorten most of the quad heads. And even though I might be missing a little bit of range of motion from the rec fem, I don't think it's really a big deal. So, but if you want to, just for practice or a drill or something, if you sit a little bit more upright in these, again, if upright comes from the pelvis going from here to the pelvis going from here. So this is the thing, I see a lot of people say they're affecting their hams or their quad length by doing this or like this. Your hams and quads don't attach to your spine. It has to be the pelvis that moves that would actually influence the length. But for all intents and purposes, between the squat and between this, hopefully you can see now we've trained the knee and the quad through pretty much its full contractile range. If you wanted to fully lengthen the rec fem, really can't do it too much in this exercise because as we go to the bottom, so let's clear some of this junk off here hopefully. As we go down to the bottom, what would we have to have again for a fully lengthened rec fem? We'd really first probably need full knee flexion or something a lot closer to it. So again, just because of the nature of the machine, we can't bring her calf into the pad. I mean, her calf, we saw how much it folded up, or we saw Tiffany's, but her calf really folds up as well against her ham as well too. But in theory, if we could cut this pad away and have her lay back into something like full hip extension, you could probably get much closer to fully lengthened. Now, there's other exercises you can do it where there's basically what's like a kneeling sissy squat variation, or basically what goes on in the back leg of a rear foot elevated split squat. And again, those things might be fine to sprinkle into your program every once in a while. Nothing inherently wrong with fully lengthening the rec fem and training it, but is it necessary? Same thing, normally the positions you have to get in there at such an extreme, you do need to be careful of not injuring yourself. And again, it doesn't even always have anything to do with the trained muscle, but also lots of times force production is so low that again, as a whole thing, it's not an exercise you'd want to pick as like, really something that's in place of something else like a squat. And then lastly here we have what I call this. There might be another name for this. People get mad when I say the names of stuff. I think they should just be happy I'm not trying to pretend that I made it up. But we have what I would call a sissy leg press. So again, sissy because her heels are up intentionally. So we're essentially taking the ankle mobility out of it. And what does that allow you to do? It allows you to fold up a lot easier. If the ankle runs out before in a more traditional, you're gonna not be able to close that ankle. So this is an example again of this could be technically considered a little bit of redundancy as far as the quads go, but there's such different exercises in my opinion. One from a squat standpoint, this is getting a little maybe more nerd than we need to, but it has a much larger moment arm. That's what I just drew there. This is the moment arm for the load. So you can go pretty much lighter on this, relatively speaking, less weight and produce similar amounts of joint torque. And at the same time, because even though the pelvis is fairly stabilized and the spine is fairly stabilized on the hack, it's even more so here because again, there's no compression on the spine, not that that's inherently bad, but there's less. And again, your pelvis is even more stable where even when you have it, you probably seen at some point in time someone on a hack moving their spine and pelvis just a little bit. So this isn't like it's something you would have to. I could technically say if I wanted the most efficient quad and hamstring workout ever, I would leave this off. But I wanted a little bit more volume for them this day. Again, these are clips from an actual workout. So that's why I programmed this as well too. And again, don't feel like you need my permission or some other stupid influencer's permission to do stuff. As long as you have some sort of thought process. Again, you might not want to do hack squats, pendulum squats, Smith squats, and free weight squats in your workout. because it's just 4 different squats. But at the same time, again, having a little bit of something that's similar, I don't think is bad. Just, again, understand the concept and don't all go all internet on me. So exercise swaps, I'm going to go through this one real quick. Seated leg curl is one of the absolute hardest ones to swap because there's no other exercise that brings every single thing to the table. You can, of course, train the same muscle length. So basically any type of stiff leg deadlift or 45-degree hip extension, depending on the way the pad is, you can get into full knee extension and full hip flexion, but you always have way more stuff involved. There's always some stuff involved with the spine, the pelvis, or whatever. But again, if you don't have a seated leg curl, those are going to be similar squats. Hack squats, you have the most different things you could use. So absolutely use like a heel, most of the time a knee dominant, which will translate to a heel elevated squat variation. So you could definitely do a back squat, even barbell back squat. You could do a safety bar squat. You could even do a front squat, even though some people think that's a no-no. Those people are confused. You could do Smith machine. And obviously there's a big argument for stability. So of course, stability is a big thing, especially depending on the individual and you know how much of that balancing thing is a challenge for them. Absolutely, you could use a Smith machine or a pendulum or a hack. You could for sure make an argument for those being in some ways better than free weights because they are more stable. You could even do a sissy leg press thing like we did, or a split squat variation. So all those could be good subs there. So again, when I'm saying this is the perfect workout, chill out. I'm not pooping free weight squats or anything like that. Those could be for sure swaps. These again are clips from an actual workout I did. So that's just what I chose for that given day. As far as lying leg curls go, the only exercise that really is pretty much almost the exact same thing is like a kneeling. So again, you guys, I'm sure I've seen you go one leg at a time, like a kneeling leg curl. It's pretty much the same thing as a lying leg curl, except it sucks more. But if you want to do a kneeling leg curl, have at it. Trains pretty much the same range of motion. Glute ham raises kind of, I mean, you can get pretty much to the all the way the same position at the top, but you're really not loaded there. So you can produce similar, joint positions, extended hip, fully flexed knee, but there's not as much challenge in that position. Of course, you could set up a cable curl or something. And there's other variations for sure. Manual resistance could be a good thing. And like I said, cables, but all those are kind of a pain in the butt. This would be one of those things. If you have a seated leg curl, I wouldn't look for a sub. I think it's definitively the best hamstring exercise. If you're trying to fully shorten the hamstring, you have a lying leg curl, don't try and have a sub, just use that. Leg extension, there's honestly no real sub. I mean, so you could do some, again, sissy squat variations. If you want to kind of take some of your body out of it and have a lot more isolation just at the knee, obviously keeping the hips fixed, so it's not really like a true squat. But to really load the top position, you'd really have to, if you don't have a machine, you'd have to use some sort of cable. You could do something stupid where you've got a dumbbell between your feet and you're doing that kind of stuff. Again, the whole point here, if you've got a leg extension, use it. And then also, if it were me, and I only was like, I'm training in my garage, I don't have a leg extension, I would never try and load the quad fully shortened. I mean, so that's why I say, if you've got it, program it, why not? But you absolutely don't have to grow your quads. And then again, same thing I just said. So basically the sissy and the the hack squat variation up here, both of those train fully lengthened quad. So those are kind of just things you could swap out there. Next one here, any workout on its own is useless. So I mean, me even saying this is the perfect evidence-based workout is kind of clickbait because you guys don't have any type of attention span. Just kidding. If you're still watching, you were the only ones with attention span. A workout is only valuable in relation to what came before it and what came after it, right? And so again, that's what has to happen long term. So if you're messing around and trying to find this volume thing figured out, that's what you're constantly looking back to. Is okay, if I'm testing this amount, let's call it, I'm going to do 10 working sets per workout, or I'm maybe seeing what happens with 8, or I'm maybe seeing what happens with 12. It's the sequence of those things over time that you're trying to track and measure, and that's not necessarily easy. But I like the concept as little as possible to produce maximal results. I think it's easier to do one thing hard than 5 things hard, right? So again, for all of that stuff, I would say for them, I was having them do pretty much basically 2 working sets per exercise, and I think that's a decent place to start for some people sometimes. But then from there, just mess around with it. Volume is a little bit variable. I can make some arguments for nerd reasons, what I've seen in person, but someone could maybe work best from 8 working sets of workout. Someone else might do better with 13. How would you know? The thing that the world is missing now, implementation. So you implement something, you do it for a long period of time, you sequence one workout after the other, not changing any other variables in that workout or anywhere else in your life, and then measure and see what happens. And as I just snuck in that last sentence saying, don't change any variables anywhere else in your life, you should realize how stupid it is for people to fixate on these little workout variables when they don't have anything else controlled for. So even when you're debating and arguing these things on TikTok, unless you're actually living like a bodybuilding monk, all these things you're arguing are just for some form of mental masturbation and not really actually going to change anything in your life because everything is all over the place. And until you get that stuff all locked down, it doesn't really matter. But if you're a bodybuilding monk and you actually are doing this stuff, tracking, measuring, and actually changing some stuff, then you might be able to figure out what's going on. So yeah, like I said, logbook is king. Obviously then long-term too, of course, is actually measuring lean tissue, which you can do from the scale, you can do from pictures, you can do from circumference measurements. So short-term, progressive overload, and logbook is king. Long-term, obviously, you need to track, and again, whatever way you do it to actually look at lean tissue, is it progressing? That's obviously the best way to know if long-term what you're doing is working, and then even having that debate of, could I be doing something more efficient? And that's really the only way to know about that. Rest time, there we go. I'm just circling that one. It's not important. 2 to 3 minutes. You know, I know that every once in a while some research will come out and say, oh, 90 seconds seems to be enough. It's like, don't just hop around with everything, especially for a bigger body part. Just go with the idea of what allows you to have the most output within a given set, right? So again, that doesn't mean you have to eat a sandwich and do the powerlifting thing where you actually bring like a whole suitcase with you, where you can like take out a picnic and have your intra-set picnics. Don't get pissed off, powerlifters. You know I'm right. So, you know, you don't need 10 minutes, but at the same time, research come out now and they'll say 90 seconds is enough without any context. Somebody out there is saying, well, I feel best when I do them 2.5 minutes or whatever. Keep doing 2 and 2.5 minutes. The big concept with rest time, I think, is it was a mistake when information was pushed a little while back to keep it like 30 seconds short and just create a lot of fatigue. I think overall, longer is better. And if for nothing else that we're not even controlling for within research, it's just basically so you can have more quality sets. If you're more mentally focused, you're not breathing hard, you actually have some stuff that will make you less fatigued coming into a set, you're able to get more out of those sets. So that is it. That is the perfect quad and ham workout. You got some idea of volume, maybe where to start and all that good stuff. As always, if you guys have any questions about this, comments, concerns, feel like want to tell me that I'm an idiot for something that I missed or I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm all for it in the captions. Or if you guys just want a safe place to go and talk, tell me about your feelings, tell me about your day, tell me about your dog or your mom's dog. But once you're done doing all of that, feel free to do the YouTube thing. Like, subscribe, share again with your mom. I know that you're sharing with your mom. I appreciate all you guys that are doing that and you're telling me in the comment section, but she's still small. She's got to get swole. So tell your mom. And if you want to support the channel, look down in the description down there. I've got links to apps, continuing education if you're a trainer, some merch if you're into that type of thing. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Until the next one, get down in the comment section too. Let me know what you want to see more of.